your economy is going into the tank. You're destroying the Russia that you have been building for the past few decades. Economically, you're destroying it because of all the sanctions and all the money going into defense and into the war. You're destroying your country. I don't think Putin thinks that he's destroying his economy.
Let's start with an extremely simple question. Nearly 24 hours, not far away as we record, since the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. What did you make of what's nearly been his first full day back in office?
Well, gosh, there's a lot that you can take from this. One is how different this first day is as the 47th president versus the 45th president, his first day back a few years ago, where it was really just kind of chaos that first day. There was, he was still trying to put together a government. He was, you could see he was unsure. He cared more about the size of the inaugural crowd, 5 years ago than he did this time around, because this time around he was ready for action. He and his people certainly learned a lot over his 4-year term, and so this first day has been seen full of action, signing these executive authorizations to do various things. And what he did, he's a showman, and also he had to deal with the fact that the inauguration festivities were going to be inside. So instead of a big parade and this type of thing, he signed a lot of these executive actions in front of thousands of people at an arena here in Washington. They set up a table. He sat behind the table, and his staff brought in these memos that he signed, and they began to take immediate effect. And some of them were, some of them were far-reaching in terms of U.S. domestic issues. They were not big foreign policy or international things, and they were not laws that he was signing. These were executive authorities that he had the authority to implement because it was his administration. But it was red meat for his MAGA crowd. They loved it, and he began to, once he would sign these things, he signs with a Sharpie pen, and he would throw the pen into the audience like it was a rock star. He was throwing, his picks, his guitar picks into the front row. I mean, it was just amazing. He's quite the showman. But he combined the showman aspect of the first day, which is normally just pomp and circumstance and inaugural balls and a lot of drinking and carousing. He turned that first day into something that highlighted himself, that highlighted his power and authority, that highlighted his actions that he was going to take and did take. And it highlighted the promises that he made on the campaign trail that on the first day he began to implement.
When he became the 45th president, the talk was all around, he's being voted in because he's something different, the great sort of political disruptor, because effectively he wasn't a politician. Do you feel like he now feels more of a politician than he ever did before?
Well, I think it depends on how you define a politician. I think he probably wouldn't call himself a politician as much as he now calls himself a strongman leader. He admires whether it's Putin or it's Erdogan in Turkey, Orban in Hungary. He likes the idea that he will have authority to do these things on his own, without Congress interfering, without worrying about being reelected in 4 years. And he feels that he has mastered the instruments of executive branch power. He's got people in who are not going to try to constrain him as his first team did. We used to talk about the adults in the room and the railings. There's the adults in the room are people who are total loyalists. He's put people into executive branch positions in his cabinet and even the sub-cabinet that were total loyalists and do what he says. And the Congress is a Republican Congress, both the House and the Senate. and they have demonstrated since they came into power um, that they are totally devoted to him and implementing what he wants to do. There's no senator or congressperson who is standing up and saying, "Not so fast, Mr. President. I might be a Republican, but I represent another branch of our separations, of our balance of power here in Washington, and I'm going to exercise my authority to make sure that what you're doing meets the Constitution, and you're not overriding your authority." There's no one standing up and saying that. They're all saying, "What do you want us to do next?" So I really think of himself. He doesn't see. I think he probably feels a politician is someone who does his bidding. I think he feels he is above that. He is something else yet to be defined.
Now, you correctly mentioned that there wasn't a huge amount on foreign policy. There was a little bit. We'll come on to that in a minute. But there was also certain elements that will impact, you would think, how the US is seen abroad. Not least this quote that he says he wants to build the strongest military the world has ever seen. You know, we know he talks about how he will bring peace through strength. What do you think he means specifically by the strongest military the world has ever seen?
Well, frankly, he has that now, and he used to say that back when he was, in his first term. He would talk about rebuilding the military after Obama had, So a lot of that is rhetoric. That the U.S. finds itself flat on its back in terms of the military. The U.S. military has its challenges, for sure. All the allies, UK, everybody, we've all got our challenges in terms of our military strength and making sure our strength is what it needs to be to deal with an aggressive Russia and China and the Indo-Pacific. So, yeah, there are issues that he's going to have to work on. But the way in which he said it to me was something we've heard before. He again building on this idea that his predecessor destroyed the U.S. military, and he's going to make it the strongest. Campaign rhetoric has always talked about the U.S. military being second to none. That is tried and true campaign rhetoric going back decades, Democrat and Republican. So in and of itself, that's not necessarily new. But with Trump, and as he talks about Greenland, Panama Canal, this kind of thing, and talking about the strongest military the world has ever seen, it has a different tone and ring to it, as if he's building a military ready to make an empire somewhere on the march, and I don't take it that way. I take it as an over the top rhetoric of a type that we've seen in the past. I think it does have a foreign policy implication, like you said, because while that might be my interpretation, having been around a while, a lot of people globally hearing that's not going to be their interpretation, particularly with the rhetoric about Panama and taking the Panama Canal back or taking Greenland by force if necessary. He also has been pushing the Canadians around a little bit. So with that kind of rhetoric married up to the rhetoric about the U.S. military, it has a different tone. So it will have a foreign policy impact. But I think, frankly, that's part of his plan, too, is he likes to intimidate. He likes to get people scared, like Putin does. This is a strong man kind of thing, is that kind of rhetoric, particularly about the military, bullies, and it intimidates. And so when he goes in to make a deal, whatever that might be, he will have prepped the battlefield, if you will, with this kind of rhetoric. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. There is a foreign policy implication to it. It's a nasty way of dealing with friends and allies, but that's his style. And but I will say the worst interpretation of that, which is an army on the march, that's not what we're going to see. But we're going to see someone who likes to talk that way to intimidate.
Jim, I believe after this interview, you're off to see some old NATO pals, aren't you? Which no doubt some of these conversations will would be interesting. And Donald Trump has been talking about 5% of GDP for all NATO members, hasn't he? I wonder what power the US military would have if he met that target, because I think you're around sort of 3.5% ish at the moment, aren't you?
Well, it's a good question, and I should know that. I think we're a bit more than that. if we were to go at 5%, assuming that we're not quite there yet, we might very well. Actually, what you're raising is an important point, not just in the NATO context, but in the U.S. Budgetary context. And I won't bore your listeners talking about the U.S. budget, but we are watching to see if he puts more money into the defense budget, because I mentioned we have challenges just like the UK and other allies do. We're going to have to put more money, I believe, into the budget to deal with some problems that we know we have. And so I'm hoping that we're going to see whether it's to go over 5% or 5% or wherever we are statistically, we're going to need to do that. On the other hand, for the United States, we've got a lot of his MAGA people saying we spend too much money fighting other people's wars or whatever it might be. And they might be like Elon Musk. Maybe he's looking at the defense budget to make some cuts. I don't know. So your point is a good one in terms of what will this administration do with the defense budget? Will we actually cut it? Or will we actually pump it up? I just don't know. But I do know the budget that the last administration, the Biden administration, sent to the Hill a few weeks ago probably wasn't quite enough. So we'll have to see what happens. But just your point back to NATO, though, and the 5% GDP on defense for allies, that's going to be a stretch. And I think what he was doing is like any bargainer, you go in to the bargaining table with the whole loaf, and you say, this is what I want, the whole loaf. And then you negotiate. And if you end up with half a loaf, that might be fine with you too. But you go in asking for the whole loaf. He went in to say 5%. I have no idea where he got that figure. I think the polls are about at 5%. And so maybe the polls said everybody needs to go there. And so I think at NATO, at the summit this summer, this is Trump's first NATO summit. It'll be in The Hague. They will have to decide on it. Between now and The Hague, at NATO, they'll be negotiating what that number should be. And I bet you it ends up at 3%. But even at 3%, it's going to be tough for everyone. I know in London it's being discussed quite a bit, just 2.5. And we'll see where the number lands. But I put my bet on 3%.
Let's talk about some of the sort of little nuggets of specifics that Donald Trump has given us over the last 24 hours about foreign policy. And I'm going to give you the quotes that he made in the Oval Office when he talked about the Ukraine war. And he says, Vladimir Putin is destroying Russia by not making a deal. I think Russia is going to be in big trouble, he says. And that was specifically referring to the Russian economy. And I find it interesting when he says, that he expects Putin to make a deal, because it's a message to Putin, but of course a deal is something Ukraine doesn't want either.
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a message to Putin, I think one of the issues that the administration is going to face in making a deal, as he said he was going to do, he's repeated that again about ending the war. The war's got to end. His problem is that there isn't a lot of leverage over Putin, in the sense that Putin thinks he's got all the time in the world. He's got all the resources in the world in terms of manpower. He doesn't seem to mind taking casualties. He's on a war footing. Who knows what his military leaders have been telling him about what the prospects of victory look like. But he right now feels he doesn't need to go to the table. He says, "Oh, we're always ready to talk," but talk about a whole loaf. He's going to go in with a whole loaf that isn't just Ukraine. He's going to go in and want to talk about a whole new security architecture for Europe. He isn't going to just sit back and say, "Yeah, well, I'm just going to keep what I've taken and I'm happy." He's got more in mind. So in terms of leveraging someone like that to go to the table, I think what Trump was trying to tell him was, your economy is going into the tank. You're destroying the Russia that you have been building for the past few decades. Economically, you're destroying it because of all the sanctions and all the money going into defense and into the war. You're destroying your country. I don't think Putin thinks that he's destroying his economy. In fact, you hear, I'm not an economist, but you hear different things about how well his economy is actually doing. Evading sanctions, the price of oil that they are able to export to others. I mean, the Chinese are buying, the Indians buy. So, Trump might paint a picture for Putin that is gloomy for you if you don't cut a deal. I don't know if Putin sees it that way.
If Putin doesn't agree to strike a deal, then what is your anticipation? I thought it was interesting that the messaging was to Putin rather than to Zelensky, because if he'd have said Zelensky, you've got to make a deal, then that does put Ukraine, you would think, in a very difficult position. But the fact that he's made the suggestion to Putin, ball in Putin's court, say he says no, as you're suggesting he's likely to. Does he then go, okay, well, my position now is we do back Ukraine, which would be maybe an extraordinary about turn. I don't know.
Well, no, you're exactly right. I think in the past few months, his people, I think General Kellogg, his envoy, on all this, have said that the leverage that they would use over Putin was to exactly say what you just said, which is, okay, Putin, if you're not coming to the table, I'm gonna give Ukraine more weapons and stuff than they could, well, will that scare Putin? Will Trump even be able to get that passed through the Congress, which has not been real happy about, as he even said in his inaugural, buying weaponry and things with American taxpayers' money to protect borders that are not even our borders. He tied that in with our problem in the southern border. And here the Americans are putting money towards someone else's border, i.e. Ukraine, and not our own. And so, uh, Putin could gamble with that and say, okay, Trump, go ahead. Let me see you get that through your MAGA people and all the people in Congress who don't want you to spend money on Ukraine. Go ahead, try it. And so, maybe Putin calls his bluff. And secondly, even if Putin, even if Trump says, okay, I'm going to unleash all this assistance, do we have it? We have been very nervous about our own stocks of equipment, and UK is nervous about that. Other allies are nervous about our own stocks we've been giving a lot of it to Ukraine. And the defense industries have not been able to replenish our stocks because of well-known problems, with producing military equipment. So it could be that Hegseth, his new SecDef, probably his new Secretary of Defense, would say to Trump, "Look, I know you want to just open the tap for assistance to Ukraine, but we don't have it, and we're not going to get it replenished for 10 years, so we really can't." And so he could have a problem there too. So that's this leverage issue. There's not a whole lot of leverage, I think, that Trump really has to force Putin to the table. Whereas with Zelensky, and this is your point, I know, Zelensky is saying, "Yeah, okay, let's make a deal." I think he's more willing to sit at the table than Putin. So how to get these two to sit down and have a talk? That's going to be difficult to do right now.
I want to talk China, even though Donald Trump sort of didn't talk about China an awful lot, and that's kind of the point I want to come to. He mentioned 25% tariff threat again against Canada and Mexico, didn't he? But no real plan for China. I saw some quotes from the chief economist of one particular investment bank saying that actually shows that Trump perhaps wants a deal with China. He says, he shied away from the sort of aggressive campaigning pre-inauguration against China. And I wondered why would Trump not have stated a sort of tariff policy immediately for any other reason? It suggests to me that he must be wanting a deal with China, which is a significant softening, isn't it?
Well, you can make a case that he bullies other countries by threatening tariffs or to invade their country to take the Panama Canal, whatever. He likes and is happy to easily bully, intimidate weaker countries. Even with Putin, that wasn't much of a bullying. As we were just talking about what he was saying about the Russian economy, that wasn't much of a shove at Putin. But with China, he's not doing that. And you would think that if he was going to cut a deal, his typical tactic was to bully, to intimidate, and then to sit at the table in front of a cowed, opposite number. But I think China is in a whole different league, and his approach is going to be very different than with a smaller, weaker, uh, you know, uh, opposite number. So I think he does want a deal. What the outlines of the deal could be, I think they're probably still working on. He didn't mention China at all, really. However, having said all of that, there was a proxy over the past few days that did involve China, and that was the future of TikTok. And so, if you remember, over the past few days, the Biden administration and the Supreme Court and the Congress were going to shut down TikTok in the United States because of the perceived harm to U.S. national security, et cetera. And one of the executive measures that he signed was to delay that for like 70 days, I think. So, in a sense, he kind of threw a bouquet of roses to the Chinese and said, wait a minute, everyone, let's just hold this. Let's talk about this. So he's kind of holding that a little bit as a little bit of leverage. He's not ready to, he's not saying from now on, TikTok is saved. We're going to keep it. I disagree with what Biden people, I love TikTok. Let's go. He didn't say that either. He just says, we're going to delay this. And so that's a whole different tactic for dealing with the Chinese, who very much don't want to see TikTok go away in the United States for various reasons. So that's his tactic with China. It's very different. It doesn't involve public intimidation and bullying. It's very quiet. It's going to be a much more complex than just throwing another tariff. A lot of the Trump tariffs are still in place. Biden didn't remove them. So we'll have to see. But that TikTok was actually giving us some insight into his view about his approach to China.
It's a shock, though, isn't it? Because if there's one thing that Donald Trump thinks about, it's image, and he has been so strong in his rhetoric to China during the campaign and since the actual election date, that I wonder whether it almost makes him look a little bit weak in a way that we've never really seen him allow himself to appear in the past.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about image. Absolutely right. But I think he's as sly as a fox. He's crazy as a fox, as they say. I don't know if you guys say that, but he's crazy as fox in the sense that there's this madman theory. I think that's been going around since the Nixon days, actually, where if you portray yourself, and this is Nixonian, if you portray yourself as a madman, that you're going to could be irrational and strike out at the least provocation, and that you got to be worried about this guy. He can be over the top, and so he likes to cultivate that image. But again, he cultivates that image with Panama, or with Denmark and Greenland. He doesn't do that with the Chinese. So the madman image is he didn't want that in dealing with China. He's doing something else. He's going to be much more Asian, if you will, quiet, behind the scenes, patient, working, slowly, deliberately towards your goal. So it's a whole different approach with China. The madman theory doesn't work with the Chinese, but it works with Panama, maybe. But you're right about image. That is something he cares most about, and we saw a lot of that this first day. A lot of that was image and image management. And I think the image that he wanted to portray in that first day was a strongman image. And he was able to do that in so many different ways, particularly with domestic issues, the border, the government, the deep state, that kind of thing. Whereas with China, I don't think he felt he needed to have China be part of the image making on that first day. He was much more clever, and I think we'll see that in the coming weeks as he begins to work with this idea of how to approach China, and it'll be much more deliberate, I believe, than what we have seen in the past, where it seems more off the top of his head.
You've mentioned the Panama Canal a few times. I just want to touch on it really a little bit briefly. I mean, there's a couple of things to say about the Panama Canal, because there's lots of people that are sort of disputing whether China has any real impact in the Panama Canal. But there's two things I want to put to you. The first is that in 2017, during Trump's first term, Panama sort of officially ceased to have ties with Taiwan, didn't they, in order to have a diplomatic relationship with China. And similarly, there are 2 of 5 ports on the Panama Canal, one on the Caribbean side, one on the Pacific side, that are controlled by Hong Kong companies. So China does have sort of direct eyes on everything that travels either direction along the Panama Canal. You can understand why some people might have some concerns, and why Donald Trump, therefore, might have some concerns. Now, that might not need to lead to, threats to take control of it, take it back, as Donald Trump says. But are they not quite legitimate concerns that he has? Because we know about China's increasing influence globally, which Trump, and actually, let's face it, a lot of Western countries are concerned about.
Well, it's the same thing with Greenland. It's the influence of the Chinese in Greenland, in terms of access to Greenland's mineral deposits, rare earths, with the Northern Sea route opening up over time above Russia, and a lot of Chinese shipping going down across Russia and then down by Greenland as they come into the European waters, and wanting to have logistical facilities, whether it's on Greenland or Iceland, and watching the Chinese work with the Greenland Home Rule government as well as the Icelandic government to buy up pieces of the logistical infrastructure, Greenlandic airport or other things. It's the same thing with Panama, as you laid out, about the Hong Kong companies and that type of thing. The worry is that whether it's the Panamanian government or it's Greenland Home Rule, that they might be vulnerable to Chinese influence, including a lot of money, to have a say, to have some control through these companies. So you're right, whether it's Panama or whether it's Greenland, there is concern that these major waterways, whether it's the Panama Canal or whether it's Greenland and the Northern Sea route, as well as the strategic location of Greenland with the United States, that there is legitimate concern about what the future could hold based on what we know about China and what their goals are and how they use their influence to control things, and how some governments find it hard to stand up to that. The money is too good. And so that's at the root of a lot of this. And the thing is, with Trump, he is firing a shot across their bow, whether it's the Panamanian government or whether it's Greenland and Denmark, saying, if you can't control the situation down there, we will. Whether it's seizing the Panama Canal or military options in Greenland. And so if you're in Copenhagen, which does they're in charge of Greenlandic foreign and defense policy. So whether it's Denmark and their ability to help Greenland Home Rule deal with Chinese influence, or it's the Panamanian government, they're rightfully nervous right now about so what's going to happen here. And I believe this is true. You can check me, but in terms of Greenland, the Greenlandic Home Rule government wanted a new airport, and the Chinese were going to build it. And the U.S. objected. We set up a consulate at Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. And at the end of the day, the Danes, I believe it was the Danes that paid for that airport instead of the Chinese. So are we going to see that kind of thing happen, whether it's the Panamanian government or it's the Danes, or is the U.S., does the U.S. feel we have to step in and tell Greenland we'll pay for, an airport or whatever it might be, or those ports with Panama? So with this, you're absolutely right. This is a small issue in the context of World War, but it's actually pretty big in terms of how do you deal with countering Chinese influence in these two important choke points in on over here in around the United States.
Jim, I wouldn't normally do this, but a man of your experience and expertise, I think, can probably handle it. So I'm going to just put you on the spot with my final question. Take a scale of 0 to 10, shall we? If 10 is the panacea, 10 is global peace for the next 4 years, everyone gets on and we're all friends, and 0 is World War III is absolutely imminent. How do you feel about the next 4 years under Donald Trump? What do you anticipate is the sort of safety of all of us around the world listening to the World in 10 and concerned of global security on a daily basis?
Well, you've really set me up. Oh my God.
We won't hold you to it.
Well, in Washington, the first thing you learn is never to answer a question like that. But I'll give it a go because it's an interesting question. I'll say that the number 10 on your scale, we're all friends, and that's never a condition in the world. You'll never reach that as much as you try to go in that direction, as much as you want that. And there's been some times when we've been pretty close. 1990s, I think, if you put aside the Balkan Wars. But when the Cold War ended, I think there was this euphoria where we felt that was really possible, and we worked towards that. And that's a whole nother podcast. And the imminence of World War III, or actually being in the early stages of it. So that's number 1 on your scale. If you talk to people in Poland or in the Baltic nations, they will say, we're already there. Nordic Baltic nations, they'll say, we're already at a phase of war with Russia due to the gray zone conflicts, the cutting of cables, misinformation, cyber attacks, assassination attempts, sabotage. A lot of things have been happening in Europe that can be traced to the Russians trying to unease everyone. So there was some that say that we're heading there, and we're already seeing signs of it right now. Certainly at NATO over the past few years, we've been putting NATO forces up along the frontier. They're in the Baltic nations, Romania, Poland. The U.S. has forces up there. UK, you've got control of the Estonia, I believe, and the NATO forces there. So so it's not like World War III is as far away as it had been in the past. And World War III, too, is not a real good term anyway. It doesn't have to look like World War III, a future conflict. So where are we then? I would say that over the next 4 years with Trump, here on the second day of his administration, he says that he wants to be a peacemaker and a unifier. He says he wants to end the war in Ukraine. That war's got to end. Gaza, he told Netanyahu, you've got to get this over with. This was a few months ago. He said that to Netanyahu. But we also see at the same time this axis of upheaval: Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, seeming to league together in some type of Hollywood movie-like bad guy coalition to cause problems in the world. So is Donald Trump as the peacemaker? Is he going to go in and make peace? Is he going to have an international relations foreign policy focus where he's going to be having his people zoom from conflict to conflict doing peace? Or is he going to pay attention to his real love, which is the domestic problems in the United States, the culture wars, and the things that really gets the red meat to the crowd going? Is that really going to be his focus? So here on his second day of his administration, I think we've got a new team. We've got a new team with a new approach, a new way of dealing with things. In the past, we dealt with things through dialogue and through processes that made us comfortable, but showed weakness to bad guys. We've got someone different now, who's got a different image of being a strong man, willing to make a deal, but it's not going to be one that's going to be us giving things up. It's going to be a strong man deal Is that what Putin will listen to? Is that something Xi will say? Well, we're dealing with a different sheriff in town. We're gonna make some concessions. I mean, we'll have to see. So in this second day, given a new approach, as unsettling as it feels, because it's so different from the past, the second day with this new team, uh, we have a chance to move away from that 0, 1, 2 part of your spectrum. We've got a chance to potentially move away if this new approach with someone who makes us uncomfortable, Donald Trump, if in fact his way of dealing with strong men works. And maybe we will find that over the next 4 years, we find ourselves in a place where the potential for things to crumble um, um, get lesser. Because he is able to bully even Putin and Xi into being on a trajectory not as alarming as it looked a week ago. If you had asked me this question a week ago, I would say, well, the things don't look good. We're heading towards zero, but maybe this will work. Maybe we tended to appease more in the past than we were strong. Um, I'm not talking Chamberlain and Winston Churchill here. That was one kind of appeasement, but it was a cousin to what we had done over with Biden and Obama too, and I was part of that administration. We weren't tough enough, and maybe with Trump, um, he's not someone who's going to appease, and so he's going to be tougher. And maybe these totalitarians would rather work with someone who's tough than with someone who's an appeaser that they're going to take advantage of. If you talk to the Balts and the Nordics and others, they would make that case. They would say we have been giving in to Putin too much, and I would agree. But so this is a long-winded answer to a very important question. But what I would tell your listeners, your podcast listeners, is that let's see what happens. We need to try some new medicine here because the old medicine, I think, was not helping us. It was emboldening Putin in a lot of ways, and perhaps the Chinese too. So let's see what a tougher bit of medicine, as harsh as it is to taste, this medicine coming from someone who has no bedside manner in terms of being a doctor. But let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Maybe this strongman approach, in terms of foreign policy, will get us to a better place. As painful as it will be to watch and to listen to, let's see what happens.